Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone to part 2 of What Now? Preparing for the Road Ahead. This is the second of our 2-part series on energy democracy in policy and practice. And my name is Selena Feliciano. I'm calling in from the ancestral homelands of the Ohlone people in West Oakland, California. And I serve as a national campaign coordinator for the Reimagined Energy for Our Community's US campaign, or Refocus for short. Next slide, please. This event is hosted by the Refocus campaign as part of the Energy Democracy Project. And we're a collaborative of about 40 organizations that are spread all across the country, putting power back in the hands of the people. And this campaign is really about stories. Stories about you and me and our neighbors, and how real everyday people across the country are reimagining the ways that we all organize our lives and our livelihoods to support the health and well-being of our communities and of our ecosystems. And in the face of calamity, like we're facing in 2025, we remain steadfast in our commitment to justice. Next slide, please. So we usually kick off these conversations on our webinars and in our public events with our homes. And your home might be in the countryside, it might be in the city, or it might be on the coast. Here we have pictured homes in Puerto Rico, in California, and in Minnesota, 3 of the places that are represented by some of our callers in today. And all of these homes use power that keep homes warm in the winter, cool in the summertime, and safe in a changing climate. We all deserve this power, and it's essential to life. But for far too long, there are entities that have thought otherwise. Next slide, please. This illustration comes from the Refocus zine that's available on the Energy Democracy Project website, depicting a triangle. Up at the top, we have centralized power, specifically control over decision-making of energy that's held in the hands of a few, while the rest of us are left to suffer. And as part of the Refocus campaign, we're peeling back the veil of the ways in which centralized power shows up in so many different parts of our lives. Centralized power here in the US, specifically via power companies and authorities, have written the rules on the cost, reliability, and safety of our electricity. And we see that today in so many different ways. Next slide, please. We have a new normal, a dangerous federal transition that has ushered in major cuts to social services, threatened the safety of trans folks, of immigrants, and many more of our loved ones and neighbors. Thousands of jobs have been slashed, and the outlook of constitutional rights looks shaky as the coup on the federal government led by corporate control continues. This week, we have a ceasefire shattered, funded by our taxpayer dollars, as more and more social services are cut right here at home. And we also have unprecedented climate disaster. Around the world, we just had our warmest January on record. And this record heat occurred despite the emergence of a La Niña event, which normally has a temporary cooling event. It was warmer than January 2024, when there was a warming El Niño event, and this comes on top of the last 10 years, which have been the warmest on record. So what now? Next slide, please. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to stay the normal. We know that energy is a tool for extraction and control of Mother Earth, of our safety, and of our livelihoods. But we also know that energy can be a tool for liberation. And our solidarity in recognizing the mirrors across our communities and the opportunities for new systems is what makes us stronger. And today's discussion will be dynamic. Our experts today will offer tools and stories and actions for you all to think through what reimagined energy for our communities could look like. A future without extraction, without exploitation, and with liberation for people across race, class, and geography. And the reality is that the energy system of tomorrow is already being organized for today. And the policy opportunities exist right now to make that a reality. So let's kick off our conversation. First, I want to give a big shout out and appreciation to Noura El Marzouki, who's helping out with tech with Emerald Cities Collaborative. If you have any problems, feel free to reach out via the Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen, and one of us can make sure that you're getting full access to the webinar. If you'd like to ask a question, you can also use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, type it in, and we might answer the questions in real time via chat or via the conversation. At the end of our conversation, we will be opening up to an open Q&A for audience members to chime in with their inquiries. And today, we have 4 speakers from California, Maine, Minnesota, and Puerto Rico, sharing their stories of resilience and the policy opportunities that we have to put power back in the hands of the people. They're going to share different tools and ways for us to play a role in keeping up momentum for energy democracy. We have Jillian Blanchard of Lawyers for Good Government, Johanna Bozuwa from Climate and Community Institute, Jeremy Kalin from Avisen Legal, and Ruth Santiago from Comité, Dialogo Ambiental. So kicking us off today is Jillian from Lawyers for Good Government. Jillian Blanchard is the Vice President of Climate Change and Environmental Justice and a nationally recognized attorney in energy and natural resources law. Ms. Blanchard has worked in all levels of government, nonprofit, and the private sector on environmental, infrastructure, and climate change issues for over 25 years. And as VP of the Climate Change and Climate Justice Program, she's managed over 600 lawyers to help provide guidance to cities, states, and nonprofit partners to help expedite the country's shift to a clean and equitable green economy and to address environmental justice. Welcome, Jillian. Passing the mic over to you.
Thank you so much, Selena. It is really wonderful to be here. And thank you to Noura and Emerald Cities and to Refocus for keeping these conversations going. I'm very, very honored to be here with you all. I'm Jillian Blanchard. I use she, her pronouns. I, too, am located on the Ohlone grounds here in Alameda, right near Selena. And I am the Vice President of the Climate Change and Environmental Justice Program at Lawyers for Good Government. And today I'm just going to talk to you a bit more about how do we cut through the noise and how do you know what is really important to be able to make forward progress in the absence of federal leadership, and in fact, in the face of federal hostility. Next slide, please. Okay, so in case you're not familiar with Lawyers for Good Government, we like to throw an army of attorneys at problems. But we were actually forged in fire on the eve of the 2016 election, where we realized that a bunch of attorneys would be needed to protect the rule of law, to protect civil rights, to protect equity, to protect environmental justice. And so we are kind of built for this moment to try and provide that assistance. And I get to the honor of working on the climate change and environmental justice work, where we're pushing equity and climate at subnational levels in the absence of federal leadership, and when we can, pushing it at the federal level as well. So this is some of the work that we've done, but I want to move right into tools that you can use and considerations and actions that you can take to kind of push that energy democracy in this moment. Next slide. Okay, this is kind of what we're up against. This is the noise. This is all of the chaos that is being created by this administration, the withdrawal from Paris Accord and international agreements, repealing federal agency protections, questioning whether or not there should be an endangerment finding that even allows us to regulate greenhouse gases. Incredible efforts to claw back federal funding and repeal parts of the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the infrastructure law. I'm talking about 600, at a very conservative estimate, $650 billion that is meant to go to underserved communities in climate, infrastructure, and water. Impacts to not only the nonprofits, and first and foremost, but also even to industry and to pushing these clean energy markets. And of course, as usual, On day one, the attempts to eviscerate equity and the goals of things like Justice 40, no prioritization of these environmental justice communities, and again, attacks, direct attacks on some of these communities. So that's the noise.
Uh-oh, Jillian, I think you're muted.
Looks like I got kicked out, but I am back now. Can you hear me, Selena?
Yes, welcome
Okay.
back.
Apologies for that. So I don't know where I got cut off, but this is the noise. So let's get into the tools and the things, the areas and buckets for you to focus. Next slide. Okay, the environmental protections are going to continue to be challenged, but importantly, we are winning on the law, and I'll get into that in future slides. Federal funding will continue to be challenged. This is what is happening. Funds are not being allocated. They're not being dispersed. There are freezes. There are terminations. There are potential investigations and inquiries and audits. There are delays because of staff decreases. And on the tax credit side, there are efforts to kind of pause tax credits and delay that funding. Those are potential vulnerabilities. But we are, again, winning on the law. I'll get to that in one more moment, but I want to talk a little bit about why this is happening, because the more information you have, the better you know your own rights and what you can do about it. Next slide. So what is really happening is that this executive, talk about centralized power. This particular executive is pushing to have centralized power in the executive branch. They are using what's called executive orders to try and capture as much power as they possibly can. But many and most of these executive orders are illegal and they are likely unconstitutional. And executive orders don't make law. They provide guidance to federal agencies to implement the new policies within the bounds of existing law. But there are three really powerful executive orders. I won't say powerful, they're attempts to be powerful, that are causing a lot of the federal funding freezes that we're seeing. Unleashing American energy, ending radical, wasteful government DEI programs, and then ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. Those last two are what we call the anti-DEI orders. And there are live links there that you'll get after this presentation. There's almost 90 executive orders that have happened since the inauguration, and there's a very handy executive order tracker if you want to see how those are going. So as a result of these executive orders, the federal agencies are going about in very, very inconsistent and chaotic manners, freezing funding, pausing funding, trying to terminate funding, etc. That's, again, the noise. Next slide. But this is what you need to know. They are continuing to cause the freezes in fundings, etc., and they can impact universities, munis, but we are winning on the law. By and large, all of I think there are 80 or 90 lawsuits at this point pushing back on these executive orders against this executive's attempt to unify executive authority and increase executive authority, which goes against the Constitution. We are winning on that law. And so we at Lawyers for Good Government consider it to be our job to try and get that information out to you all so that you can use these lawsuits and this ongoing litigation to push back. We're tracking that and assisting grantees and decision makers to help you know when to be able to use these lawsuits, when you can push the envelope back and help anyone you're working with, grantees, local electeds, in whatever space you're working in, to know your rights related to your clean energy project so you can access that federal funding. It's never been more important to tell the story of what's going on in your area. So learn what you can about what is being funded in your area or what is supposed to be funded under the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure law. Tell your story, because we are connecting people with the litigators to get good results in court. And they're rapidly changing, but again, we are winning on the law. Next slide. Okay, this is a summary of how we are winning on the law, but the main things I want you to know is that it does take time. And so we are here to help. We have an army of attorneys that we like to throw at these problems. And if you know of any grantees, whether they're local governments, municipalities, or importantly, these nonprofit entities that for the first time we're getting federal funding, send them our way. That is a live link to use our legal intake request form where we're providing one-on-one assistance to Department of Energy, EPA, and USDA grantees to meet with and get consultation from a pro bono attorney and stay informed on what the law is as it's changing. So that second link is to subscribe to stay informed. Next slide. I just want to talk very quickly on the tax credits. Of all the things that are being challenged right now, the tax credits are the most safe. They enjoy bipartisan support. They are written into the law. I know that Jeremy is going to talk quite a bit about how you can leverage things like direct pay as part of your capital stack to really build these projects. But I want you to know that it's really important to claim those tax credits for existing projects that you may have already completed. The more that we claim those tax credits, the safer this law will be going forward. So let us help you. We have live links right there as to how you can find out if you have clean energy projects that may be eligible right now for tax credits, and how to go about filing for that. And then the last slide is what you can do. These are the ways that we see being significantly important. Raise awareness of the subtle efforts this administration is taking that are having big impacts. Tell your story of the pain that might be happening on the ground related to grant freezes or uncertainty or hostility and attacks against nonprofits. Make your voice loud as you're comfortable making. And we have connections to crisis comms and other firms that we can put you in touch with that will help you do this. Provide facts to counterattack these misleading attacks on frontline EJ orgs. It's so important for us to tell the story. Connect with your local electeds to let them tell your story and stay the course. As much as you're capable of staying the course and being patient, trust your experts, trust the people that actually can cut through the noise and stay the course, because we are winning on the law. It will take time, but this is the moment for us to really, really hold the line and stay the course, because these 100 days will define the next 4 years. So we're here to help. We have lots of assistance for you and resources and tools. And I just want to say thank you for all that you do to push energy democracy in this moment. We will not go backwards. And with that, I want to turn it back to Selena, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jillian. I really appreciate how concise you gave all of these calls to action. They were just so concise and really easy to follow. And I feel really inspired to be able to use these in my own work and also share it out with a lot of my collaborators too. So really grateful for all the work that you're doing and for also helping instill some ongoing hope in these times. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, our next speaker is Johanna Bozuwa. And Johanna uses she, her pronouns and is the executive director of the Climate and Community Institute. She directs the network of researchers and experts to develop crucial and justice-based climate policy. Her research focuses on extraction and fossil fuels, energy justice and democracy, and the political economy of transitions. Welcome.
Hi, thank you all, and thank you, Selena, for having me, and Nora for putting this on. It means so much to have these types of spaces in this moment, and also thank you to just like the panelists that are here and providing such great insights. And you know, my co-panelist Jillian has just done such a great job of showing what's at stake, showing how the Trump administration is trying to put the limits on energy democracy and the transition. And you know, the DOGE assault on the administrative state, it is just a massive attack on climate policy, in addition to like the very idea that government can and should work for people. You know, the slash budgets and like sideline scientists are a recipe for further climate breakdown, and the US is going to lose its climate gains, however modest they may have been. So it really does mean that as we are gaining, like, how do we push into hyperdrive after losing action, after, seeing some of this decimation? And really what I want to focus in on is that question of like, where do we go from here? How do we shift the levers of power back in our direction? Um, because right now we have a serious situation in which elites can't understand why they keep losing to a man like Trump. They're mortified, unable to come up with a compelling way to respond to this moment. And a major reason, I think, is because they have an inability to understand the moment because they are divorced from the ground and their messages are ringing hollow to people who are trying to just survive the experience of late capitalism. And I do think that our economy has created this experience of a working class unraveling in the US. We have just unending working hours, ever-growing chasm between the have and the have-nots, high rents that are hitting extremes in the US. And all of this is contributing to this feeling of atomization and isolation. And the extremes in our ecological systems, paired with the realities of this extractive economy, is just creating this consistent cycle of harm. And so, as a movement, I think that there's this shifting reality on the ground that means that we have to consider how our tactics and our strategies match. And we need climate policy and decarbonization to be part of this broader struggle for progressive economic populism. We need to be able to develop and communicate smart, simple policies that materially transform people's everyday lives. When I talk about economic populism, I want to be very clear that I am not just focused on accruing benefits to the white working class. I'm talking about the vast majority of people who are working and living in the United States. Data for Progress in 2024 did a series of different polls on people's top issues and found consistently that it's high prices that are most important to them, and climate was coming a little bit below. But what that tells me is not that we shouldn't be tackling the climate crisis, but that we are trying to survive high rents and people are trying to pay their grocery bills. And the truth is that climate is directly tied to people's material experience. The wildfires, the droughts in California are affecting food prices. The floods are making housing costs go higher. And, all of this is also forcing people into further isolation. Thus, the point of entry or activation for climate organizing, energy democracy organizing can be different in different contexts. Not only are the people on Cancer Alley near petrochemical sites directly affected by fossil fuels, now also tenants in New York City are trying to survive electricity blackouts during heat waves. So the piece of the story that still feels so right to me about where the climate movement has been building and trying to open up to is that kind of more intersectional, more multiracial coalition of labor, of indigenous organizers, et cetera. And I still believe that's the coalition that we need. And I think we just need more advocates to deeply embed in the constituent movements of tenant movements, debtors movements, labor movements, local organizers, and for our focus to be squarely on that material reality of everyday people, and build up the known benefits of of those investments, and name collective villains of this story. It is the fossil fuel industry. It is the big banks and insurance companies. It is the landlord. And the alternative that we can offer to people is climate policy you can touch, campaigns that tell those stories. And I do think that campaigns like Public Power can be a part of this larger movement and momentum towards green economic populism and action, because people are sick and tired of their utilities, sick of shutoffs, and tired of high utility bills. This is, in fact, an opportunity to activate new people into decarbonization campaigns. Public power campaigns can be tangible. They can be straightforward. Do you hate your utility? Do you keep feeling and experiencing increasing rates, but the service keeps on getting worse? It is our grid. We can own it. And states really matter right now. State and local jurisdictions really matter for showing the path forward and experimenting with new types of campaigns and decarbonization vehicles. I was just talking the other day with folks in New York who passed the Build Public Renewables Act. And they were able to do so because they built political and public momentum for a big thing to happen that was going to provide higher wage jobs to union workers and also specifically lower costs of utility bills for low-income folks. And there's a huge range of different ways to take on a public power campaign, or how that can look in your state or your locality. I mean, just one option, we've been working at Climate Community Institute with the Chicago Teachers Union on negotiating into their current contract solar on the top of schools. And this is another example where the Connecticut Green Bank, a quasi-public bank, has actually been critical in getting 80 solar projects that are publicly owned onto K through 12 schools throughout the state. And this is the way that they've set it up is so that there's actually not even a down payment that the public school needs to make. The Green Bank is holding that, and it means that the schools are immediately seeing cost reductions. And another example is from my own state of Maine. There was a proposal on the ballot in 23 that was focused on actually taking over the grid. And, that was because there was just a massive number of outages that were happening in the state, and transportation was the biggest key to decarbonization in my rural state. And when I talked to people and knocked on their doors, everyone from the most liberal to the most conservative, so many of them said, I don't understand why Central Maine Power is taking my money and sending it to Iberdrola, the multinational corporation. We deserve to own this grid. And so, and though we lost that campaign, I think in part it was because we were fighting against the utility that was scared as heck of us and outspent us 40-1 on political campaigning. I think that shows that they are scared, and that we need to get better at these types of campaigns and keep the momentum up, because we deserve to own our grid. So, I think I'll close up this section and hand off to the next panelist by saying that there is, we are really in this moment. So many people are looking for how to rebuild collective power for, Democrats or, progressives. And I think it's our opportunity as energy democracy organizers to show what the world can look like, and actually be able to do that in our community, show people what it means to invest in their material reality and make their lives better. So even though things seem so horrible and harsh, I think that there's also so much power that we have left to build together. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. That was such a powerful ending statement and really grounding. I really appreciated how you emphasized the need for us to really consider the material reality of people across the country, across class and race and geography, and the reality is that there's still so much opportunity for us to be able to not just name our collective villains, but also name our collective opportunities for liberation and for getting past this particular moment in history. So thank you, and I'm excited to hear more as questions come in. We're going to go on to our next speaker, Jeremy Kalin. And Jeremy, I'm just pulling up my notes here, is an energy tax credit and project finance lawyer with 2 decades of professional and public service helping expand the clean energy economy. He served in the Minnesota House of Representatives, the White House, the U.S. Department of Energy, and with hundreds of local governments and citizen coalitions. As a legislator, Jeremy wrote Minnesota's first solar incentives and has personally facilitated more than $1 billion in investment in solar, energy efficiency, clean water, and other renewable energy projects. His particular passion is structuring public and private financing tools to make solar available and affordable across incomes, geographies, and utility territories. Thanks for being here, Jeremy. Welcome.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be with you, Selena, and the Energy Democracy Project team. And so many familiar names in the participant list, attendee list, and so many new folks. So thanks to everyone for making the time. It's an honor to be with and to try to follow Johanna. I can't meet your great energy and my partner in progress and defense, Jillian. And I wanted to actually pick up from Johanna's piece to share a testimonial from the recipient of one of my clients that I've had the pleasure of working with, Capital Good Fund, a gentleman named Mark Thomas in Savannah, Georgia. And I'm just going to read from his testimonial and then give Nora a chance to work out how to present my slides there. Mark says, you know, this last year we applied to the Georgia Bright program through the Savannah Office of Sustainability to get solar panels and batteries installed. We had no upfront cost since the panels and batteries are leased from Capital Good Fund. Since the system went live, our monthly electric bills have been less than $300 a month. But even more important, during Hurricane Helene, we never lost power. That's all caps. Although the streets are dark for blocks around us. My medical equipment worked continuously through the night without even waking me when the grid went down. I mean, Capital Good Fund is a mission-driven nonprofit organization that works all over the country to provide consumer financing solutions that are aligned with the public interest and public good, that are non-extractive, and they took their work on providing capital for the good and became a nonprofit solar lender, one of the very first to take advantage of the direct pay mechanism now available for solar projects, and won the Solar for All statewide grant program in Georgia, one of the toughest places in the state to make rooftop solar work because of policies. You know, that work is having real impact. So next slide. One of the principles that I brought for a long time has been to my work has been to play the ball where it lies. That's a golf term. I'm actually a terrible golfer. I like other sports, but what it means is that, you know, we can push hard to engage in policy work, and we need to do our best to defend the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act that are helping folks. You know, the IRA itself was the largest investment in climate action by any legislative body in the world in history. You can go to the next slide. But, you know, we should not build a future entirely around whether we succeed or don't succeed in defending all of the tax provisions and all of the funding. We should stay focused on the future possibilities of community-focused, community wealth building, resilient clean energy projects like Mark Thomas's. That said, I think there's a path where we need to lift up the stories we're talking about to both maximize our opportunity to defend the progress made in the Inflation Reduction Act and build on the successes we've had, which I'll detail in a little bit more robust path as Jillian laid out a little bit, and to spur, let's stay on this slide for a second, and to spur just more and better tools, regardless of the outcome of trying to preserve the investment tax credits, bonus tax credits, federal funding, and particularly the direct pay provision, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. So we're currently in the first 100 days of the new administration, a very hostile administration to what we want to achieve. And as Jillian laid out a little bit, the first act in the addressing the tax provisions, which I'm going to walk through in a little bit more detail, that have been so beneficial for project development, including Capital Good Fund and lots of my clients, some that are on this webinar and others. The first step is adopting a joint budget resolution. The House has passed a budget resolution and the Senate has passed a budget resolution, but they're not reconciled yet. They're not aligned, and they need to actually go through that process in order to have a comprehensive budget resolution. And then and that's only going to take 50 votes in the Senate plus the vice president. And with Republican majorities in the House and Senate, they can do this on their own. And the only unifying thing, sadly, for us on this call and engaged in this work is making wealthy people wealthier. It's the only thing that really holds together unanimous votes in the Republican caucuses, is extending those Trump tax cuts of 2017. They have to take action by the end of the year. So they need to pass a reconciliation bill and then pass a tax bill. They may get 2 bites of the apple in the calendar, but let's assume they only get one, given the stresses and on their politics and their challenges internally. But the real question is how quickly a tax bill will be drafted and released, how quickly it will then get negotiated, and then how quickly they can pass it and get signed into law. I say that because I want you to be able to make sense of the process that's happening in DC, but also because we need to be developing projects and moving forward so that projects have begun construction are locked into being able to take advantage of these credits. Ideally, projects that are already placed in service, but our intelligence suggests that, and we can go to the next slide, that the popularity of all of these tax credits that were enacted in the Inflation Reduction Act have resulted in significant support. I think let's go to the next slide. And you can kind of click through these every 15 or 20 seconds, Nora, thank you. These are wildly popular, largely, even among Republicans. And one of the reasons, ironically, you can go to the next slide, that things are so, and let's pause here for a second, that we've been able to prove how successful the Inflation Reduction Act tax regime has been by having community-based projects like in Savannah, Georgia, and in Kansas and Indiana and Kentucky and Montana and Idaho, and places where, frankly, that are folks who are buying into the rhetoric to just try to destroy the IRA. But this is the task in front of the Republican tax writers, is to find, now the number is actually $4.5 trillion, is the number that they need to find on paper in order to meet the budget resolutions that have been passed by the House and the Senate. If they were to just gut the entire IRA tax provisions, they would save, barely over 10% of what's needed. So while it all adds up, you can go to the next slide. We don't expect, because of everything going back from August 2024 to now early this week, the New York Times reported on a letter that 21 members of the House Republican caucus have sent to their speaker and released publicly, calling for preservation of much of the Inflation Reduction Act tax credit regime, particularly the investment tax credit. Let's go to the next slide. And, it's the stories that you've been telling have been so powerful, and you need to keep talking about the projects you're doing, regardless of what you think the politics are in your communities, from manufacturing to projects that generate power. On the left, you can see that 80% of the investment on the energy provisions funding and tax credits have gone to red or purple swing states. And the reality is that what that actually means is that it's been a nationwide lifting up of opportunity. Next slide. So, here are the technologies that were significantly expanded by the Inflation Reduction Act as eligible technologies under the Section 48 investment tax credit. You can go to the next slide. Now in 2025, those projects that are in blue are still eligible based on timing to begin construction of these projects through, in some cases, 2034. So keep on rocking and rolling with projects. But the other regime that the tax code has shifted to, next slide, for projects that begin construction in 2025 or later, you have to meet the clean electricity standard, which is 0 greenhouse gas emissions for the generation of electricity. So batteries, microgrids, wind, solar power, and solar thermal All of those are eligible technologies now. And those that are in white just have to meet the zero greenhouse gas emission life cycle analysis test to generate power. Heating alone, ground source heat, actually doesn't generate electricity. So you have to have an electricity generation component there. But for all of these, next slide, we can generate, if you meet prevailing wage requirements or are 1 megawatt or below and are exempt from them, that base amount is 30% of the project cost as a federal tax credit. Next slide. And of course, many of you are familiar with, and then the slide after this, with the multiple bonuses that we can get on top of that. I don't expect that the low-income bonus credit will survive after this tax bill, and I'm not sure about the energy communities bonus credit. I expect this entire stack will change, but all of our intelligence suggests that because of the broad national and bipartisan support and the storytelling that y'all have been doing, that we can save the investment tax credit and we can continue to make it applicable for community scale projects. So that's where I want to end, is the next slides here. So start here, but don't move forward yet. The transformational piece of the Inflation Reduction Act, and the thing that just makes my heart ache, because I've worked for 15 years to try to make the investment tax credit refundable for tax exempt organizations. And many of you are working on projects for where they're owned by 501c3s or by tax exempt tribes or local governments. And rather than having to go through the more complicated structures I'm going to describe on the next two slides, in this slide, you can see that a 30%, 40%, 50% credit can go to that purple entity for the cost of all of those projects owned by those LLCs you see there. I'm just using as examples, Minneapolis Solar LLC or West Virginia Solar LLC. The payments made by the residents who are participating in these projects, and this applies to homeowners as well as renters. I see in the chat the really good comment that these structures are making projects pay off in places that have never worked before. Why? Because 100% of the value of the tax credit goes to the nonprofit corporation. We cannot give up direct pay without a fight, and we need to keep telling these stories. If we do lose it, we can go to the next slide. We do expect that one of the new provisions, and for the first time ever, a federal tax credit was authorized by the IRA to be sold as a raw credit to qualified buyers. We're still, unfortunately, making wealthy people wealthier through this structure, but we're able to preserve 80 to 90% of the value of the credit for these projects. And we expect that it's very likely that a subsidiary, whether disregarded here or actually could be turned into a for-profit that is owned by that nonprofit or other community organization, could still sell its tax credit under this structure. The nice thing is that we can develop projects under direct pay structures, as we're doing for some of you on this call, and just shift that structure if Congress takes away this opportunity for the future. And then lastly, if we have to, we can go to an old-fashioned structure that was developed here in Minnesota 30 years ago for for the very first large wind projects, a partnership flip that allows us to still attract those tax credit investors for the benefit of the project structures. You'll notice that all of the stuff on the bottom of these slides don't change, that we're developing project structures that can be replicated and scaled so that we can have the impact regardless of what we do. So I have three challenges for folks on this call. The first is tell your stories. Help us try to defend direct pay and certainly defend the rest of the tax credit regime that is a tool that can help us rock and roll for the future. We want all the tools possible, and we want all the tools that maximize community benefit. So let's hope that we can tell those stories. I'll put a link into the chat in a little bit of a storytelling platform, please. The second is to develop projects. If you can begin construction by the end of this year and Congress does what we expect them to do, we believe that those projects will have vested their tax credit and the ability to take even direct pay. Knock on wood that we're going to succeed on that front, but keep developing projects. And finally, to make that possible, for those of you who are close to foundations and philanthropy, or or actually are on this call and represent foundations or advise them, don't wait. We're talking about loans and projects that already meet your underwriting criteria, that already are ready to be developed or soon to be developed. Ruth's going to talk some in Puerto Rico, and we know that you have projects that are ready to rock and roll, and that our foundation partners have PRI and even market rate lending tools and capital that we're ready to put out on the market and put to use. So tell your stories of the projects in the works or completed. Keep rocking and rolling. Reach out to all of us on this call for technical assistance. And then 3, foundations, be our partners and move as fast as we can to adjust to the new reality to keep benefiting recipients like Mark Thomas and those that we are going to have already heard about and will continue to hear about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for your clear calls to action and for really rooting us in some tangible ways that we can keep project development going and continue to work towards that reality and that vision that we all want to see of a just transition of our energy system. So thank you. All right. I'm going to welcome in our last speaker today, Ruth Santiago. Ruth is an environmental and community lawyer who lives in Salinas, Puerto Rico, where she has worked for over 30 years on projects ranging from a community newspaper to ecotourism projects to rooftop solar energy pilot projects. Ms. Santiago has helped establish broad alliances to protect communities from water pollution, from landfills, emissions and discharges from power plants, and residual waste from coal combustion. She's part of a civil society initiative to promote solar communities and energy democracy called We Want Sun, or Queremos Sol, and I'll drop that link in the chat. Most recently, Ruth has worked on cases related to energy projects and integrated resource plans. Welcome, Ruth. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Elena, and thank you to the entire Energy Democracy Project team, and hi, everyone who's tuning in. Special shout out to Hilda Llorens and Diana Santi, who I work with closely. My internet connection is unstable, so at some point I may have to switch over to my phone, but so far so good. Yeah, so in terms of the topic of this conversation, what now, with the whole situation that the previous speakers have described, I think that very much depends on where you are. And in general terms, I guess we can divide US in 2 camps, I guess, the states or jurisdictions that have democratic governments or governments that are inclined to acknowledge climate change and things that we can do to address that, and empower communities as well in the process. And of course, I think the majority now of the jurisdictions are not in that camp, right? Are states run by Republican governments, and that is the case of Puerto Rico. And of course, there are some unique aspects here in Puerto Rico. Not only do we have a full Republican administration that is certainly not in favor of addressing in any way the climate crisis that we can see, right? Has shown no inclination to renewable energy, much less distributed renewable energy, which is what we advocate for in both the Queremos Sol civil society proposal, many other coalitions, and very locally here in southeastern Puerto Rico, which is the site of a lot of fossil fire generation and also a lot of highly impacting renewable energy projects, utility scale, industrial scale renewable energy that we've been trying to avoid because we have seen already the impacts to communities in terms of increases in stormwater and flooding and a lot of sediment load in that stormwater. And Diana Santi can talk more about that at some point in some future webinar. So what we're trying to do here is, first of all, because of the very difficult situation in terms of not only our the local administration, but also the federal, is to continue to promote distributed renewable energy projects, community empowerment in the process, energy literacy, and democracy, of course. And the way we're doing that is primarily through grants with foundations and trying to continue to build out these rooftop solar pilot projects. I think that what we're seeing here in Puerto Rico is probably the worst case scenario. For example, we recently have been fighting against the extension of the operation of a coal-fired power plant here in Guayama, run by the AES Corporation. The plant was supposed to shutter in by the end of 2027, and the legislature here approved an extension for about 5 years to run the plant. And this is so ironic because, as you all know, in a tropical island, and many studies have shown the solar potential that we have here in Puerto Rico, and that's the way that Puerto Rico can achieve its energy independence. And although, as I mentioned earlier, the utility scale projects are not the right fit here, but certainly studies have confirmed over and over that we have sufficient rooftop solar potential to meet all of Puerto Rico's energy needs. And of course, there are also parking lots and other built up areas. And so we're working still very hard to promote those kinds of alternatives that do not unnecessarily sacrifice land, ecosystems, and communities, nearby communities, as a place where, land is at a prime, like very scarce amount of agricultural land. We're seeing these utility scale projects being cited continually, especially here in southeastern Puerto Rico, in those areas. In terms of financing these projects, I think it's important to talk about direct public funding, right, for this kind of distributed renewable energy model. And many of you probably know that, especially after Hurricane Maria in 2017, interestingly, the Trump administration allocated the largest amount of funding in FEMA's history for public assistance for the Puerto Rico electric system. At that time, it was about $9.4 billion. And since then, the Biden administration added about an equal amount, and it's really over about $20 billion that have been allocated in federal funds, both disaster recovery and mitigation, for the electric system here in Puerto Rico. And unfortunately, a lot of that has been transferred to a private company called Luma Energy that is basically rebuilding the same centralized electric grid. But they're so inefficient that they haven't been able to use much of the money, or certainly not the majority. But there's also been a lot of funding to build out more fossil-fired plants, especially methane gas-fired plants. And there is a huge push here to build out more of that kind of infrastructure, as opposed to, the solutions, the alternatives that I mentioned earlier. So the situation is very critical, and I think in our case, resistance is very important. And also, of course, continuing to raise the resources to keep up the pilot projects that different communities throughout Puerto Rico are implementing. So in the absence of government support for distributed renewable energy and community empowerment in that way, the funding is currently not available from the government, and we think that the only way, especially in a place like Puerto Rico, where 40% of the population, basically more than 40% of the population is living under the poverty rate, that public funding for distributed renewable energy, energy efficiency, literacy is primarily the way forward to achieve what we call universal access to energy security. So I'll leave it there, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for giving us the landscape of what's going on in Puerto Rico. And I think the story of Puerto Rico is so important when we consider the national and even global spread of our energy system, and the reality that energy is used for extraction and control, but also can be a tool for justice and liberation and decolonization. We see how in Puerto Rico, the control of the energy system by a corporation like Luma means and spells really bad conditions for folks all across Puerto Rico. And we also see incredible resistance and vision and building directly by the people that I think serves as a wonderful mirror for the organizing that's happening all across the country as well. So thank you for that. And I see folks can't see me. Maybe we can start. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Great. So we are actually going to be opening up for a question and answer session at this time. I see some questions were dropped through the Q&A function down at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to drop some more questions in, and I'm going to just start to chime them out, and we can sort of have an open conversation. And the first question that I want to bring up comes from Antonia. And Ruth, if you're able to unmute and answer the question whether the $20 billion from FEMA has been challenged by the current Trump administration.
Not as far as I know. I know that there have been challenges to a lot of what the previous speakers mentioned about challenges to especially the IRA and the Infrastructure Act. But as far as I know, the public assistance funding from FEMA and the mitigation funding is still in place. There was even before the Trump administration, there was a lot of delay in making that funding available, but in large part, apparently it has to do with FEMA objecting to the way that Luma Energy was using the funds or proposed to use the funds by hiring its parent companies or affiliated companies without doing competitive bidding processes, right? So Luma is a joint venture between Quanta Services and ATCO Canadian Utilities. It was completely new, took over the grid here in Puerto Rico, and now we have double the number of power outages and the frequency of those outages. And in this summer, there is an estimated outage diagnosis of a quadruple what it was before Luma took over the grid. So the problems have been with this company, and it may be that DOGE or the federal government will say that even this private company is not managing the funds properly, and they may be at risk in that sense. but as far as I know, they are still in place.
Jillian.
Yeah, I think Ruth will know best about what's happening in Puerto Rico. I can say that in terms of FEMA, there is an executive order out talking about doing away with FEMA in its entirety. So I think that FEMA funding is one to like track and follow, and to make sure it's still in place. And I put the legal intake form, if you find out, Ruth, that there are issues with any FEMA funding, please feel free to send them our way to get some protection and backup and to be able to push back. And I'll just say that I think it's an important one for us to continue to tell the story of the value of that FEMA funding, not only for resilience, climate resilience. We have to take the word climate out. That's fine. Economic resilience. This is such critical funding. So just wanted to flag that piece so people have it on their radar and are tracking.
Thank you,
No.
Jillian. Jeremy.
I'll just add, and I want to reiterate sort of broadly, not just on the FEMA front, but that Jillian and I had the opportunity to partner this late summer, early fall on being among the first to actually raise the red alarm on how aggressive and illegal or taking illegal action this administration might be, and that across the board, the courts have to date upheld over and over that Congress appropriates funds, that federal agencies enter into contracts for those funds, and that those contracts are valid and enforceable obligations that the federal government must pay. And as disheartening as the public rhetoric is, even on those extrajudicial rendition case that's just heartbreaking, and they're not deportations, just to be clear, they're because deportations take folks back to their original country of origin, that even where you see terrible rhetoric in front of the courts, the administration is following court orders. They're acting terribly and slowly, but they're following court orders, and we are defending, and as Jillian says, we are winning. So I ask all of us to remember that and to say, we're not losing. These are illegal actions. The rule of law is holding, thanks to many of our heroes, and that it can feel so deflating to be Jedis fighting the Death Star over and over and over, but that we're actually doing pretty damn well, pardon my French. And the communitarian ethic of let's stick together is really working.
Can I add one thing there, Selena, that has been really powerful for me to keep in my mind? I don't know if it'll be helpful for others, but the first goal of an authoritarian government when they're trying to take over is to cause people to preemptively comply. They put out unconstitutional, illegal things, and people get intimidated and they preemptively comply. And they kind of seal their own fate in that way. So everybody has their own risk tolerance. No one should do anything they're uncomfortable with. But to the extent that we are able to hold the line together, it's such an important thing that we don't preemptively comply with illegal orders.
Thank you, Jillian, for that addition. Another question that I have is, given the current federal transition, how is that impacting, and specifically for Johanna, how is that impacting public power campaigns? In what ways is there a back and forth play between federal policies and state or local policies?
I think it's such an interesting question, and one I was confronted with the other day in relationship to the Build Public Renewables Act in New York, because one of the things, that was a campaign that worked for 3 years fighting so that they could build public renewables through the New York Power Authority. And one of the things that was really helpful at the end of that campaign was the passage of direct pay. And so I got the question, well, now that, we might see these tax incentives go away, do you think that the commitment to build public renewables will be rolled back? And I said, you know what? I actually think as an entity that doesn't have the same profit incentive, it might be more enduring than the private developers who are coming in and they need to see the profit margin, right? And so I actually think it's a really interesting opportunity for us to say, okay, who is durable at the end of the day? Who's going to keep this marshaling forward? And it's when it is like in the public interest, it's communities that are driven and like want to make this happen that can overcome some of these barriers that we're feeling at the federal level come down. Because like, let's be honest, capital is always scared. Like that's the truth. And we are going to need a certain amount of private capital and are going to have to think in new and interesting ways. And I think Jeremy did a really great job in his presentation of identifying how we are pulling these different things together. But I think like there is financing and there is public financing and bond financing, all these different mechanisms that we can pattern together at the state level. And I think it's also an opportunity to think about public power at regional levels too. Like if New Hampshire, like let's say if Vermont doesn't have the fiscal capacity, but Massachusetts does that actually make a justification to think at the scale of New England, of how we're thinking about supporting one another in these kind of chaotic federal times to keep marching forward? So I actually think that even though all this is happening at the federal level, it actually is accelerating the need for these types of strong big like scale, like thinking about scale. And when I say scale, that can be distributed renewable energy at scale too, right? Like bringing these types of campaigns to scale. So maybe I'll stop there.
Thanks, Johanna. Jeremy.
I just want to reiterate Johanna to just that a lot of the time that I spend is using the language of the tax code. I mean, to the point where, I'm a dork. I have 2 volumes of the code in print on my desk, and I have another copy at home. I had to buy a second because I was missing when I was working from home. That's how much of a dork I am. But, is translating what we're trying to do on the ground at communities benefiting projects into legal documents, the code, and addressing risk. And when I was trying to learn this as a legislator 15 years ago, how do I talk to finance? There's uncertainty and then there's risk. Uncertainty is very hard to price. Risk, you start to then just say, what are you really concerned about? And I think the more that Johanna, your sort of specificity of saying, what are you actually concerned about is the threat to project development or the threat to community ownership. And then let's talk through it. Because if it's like you're worried about just big, wild uncertainty, well, I can't tell you not to be afraid that we're going to lose the rule of law and that the dollar is not going to be a reliable currency. I can't have that conversation with you. But I can have the conversation with you about, are you concerned that a 12% interest rate won't make this project viable for a 20-year loan obligation? That's really fair. We can put that into a pro forma and make it work. Can we bring in guarantees? This is why our allied capital partners cannot sit on the sidelines and need to answer the call to continue the work. Because, and I love that you just connected for me the community organizing and power building with capital deployment in such a meaningful way for me, that because I'm on the capital deployment side trying to facilitate power building. And I think just continue to talk to the capital folks and the power building folks to say, even in philanthropy, if you're supporting power building work, that means you also need to support the capital deployment work. And it may not mean that you need to put billions of dollars at risk. It may just mean that we need to be targeted and surgical in how we do so.
Thanks, Jeremy. We've got a question from John. An enormous barrier in Washington state is lack of consistent funding for home repairs. Things like mold remediation, fixing holes in roofs, weatherization that are prerequisites for heat pumps. And we know that from an extensive survey conducted by organizers and working in rural communities statewide, that there's an enormous needs for these services. Right now, projects are being completed at a rate such that it would take 100 years to fix up all low-income homes and housing units, making them safe and getting them ready for heat pumps. We'd love to have a statewide workforce with good paying jobs in communities statewide, and there's evidence that a lot of people would want these jobs, but we can never count on the legislature to provide consistent funding. So nobody wants to hire more in-house workers because of the risk of having to lay them off in a year or two. Any recommendations? Just an open question.
Irina, it's a really good point. I think the kind of pre-electrification pieces are so integral, and to getting them right. I mean, that is often such a barrier to actually being able to provide, like those material changes to people, and like, being able to do mold remediation alongside heat pumps just allows you to tell that story of like, we are in fact making your life better, right? So it's like things that I think we do need to do power building around, because it's like going to make people's houses more livable. But the thing that I often reference, and I know that Noura, who is helping with this, will know it quite well, is the Whole Homes Repair Act in Pennsylvania as a clear example that had bipartisan support, and was able to pass. And that also included commitments to like training and labor, high roads labor and workforce commitments. And also, even though it was going to be the homeowner that was receiving like those benefits, they required and set in tenant protections at the outset so that tenants could also stay in those homes. So I think that that might be an interesting model to look at as something that, is a program that was immediately kind of like oversubscribed. Of course, they need to continue to expand it and make it more accessible. And it is like funds are always a problem when you are working at these kind of state levels, but I do think it does give a model to some of the work that you're describing.
And I'd love to uplift and kind of plus one to what Johanna has said, and also uplift something I put in the chat, that I really think this group can even push the envelope on, which is the U.S. Climate Alliance. At Climate Week of last year, they announced a big initiative. So for folks who aren't familiar with Climate Alliance, they're a network of basically half the country's governor's offices, who were formed actually in Trump 1.0, saying they were going to move forward at the subnational level on climate and equity. And they have at least committed to training 1 million new registered apprentices by 2035. That means paying for them, giving them training, getting them into the workforce. So I would encourage anyone who is interested to connect and make them meet that promise, make good on that promise, to implement that funding, to implement those apprenticeship opportunities, to get those more certain job opportunities out there. I'm not going to lie and say that there is enough funding for it. There isn't. You're absolutely right. Even with the $2.2 trillion that this historic federal funding offered, even if it went out freely the way it was intended, it was still not going to be enough money. But I think what we can do is lean on the things that we can rely on. And this is one of the commitments that these 25 governor's offices have made. And let's push that commitment. Let's make sure that gets implemented so the workforce is expanded to do some of that work. It's not enough funding, but it is a way that we can move forward in this kind of time of scarce resources.
Thank you. And John dropped in the chat. Thanks, everyone. This is super helpful. Folks in the audience can look to the chat for a lot of helpful links that were shared. I dropped a link for Whole Homes Repair Act in Pennsylvania that was mentioned by Johanna. Jillian dropped a link from U.S. Climate Alliance around building a climate-ready workforce. And I also dropped a note that Jeremy had dropped in the Q&A of what Minnesota did to enact a pre-weatherization funding and training grant program in 2023. So some good models out there and some potential opportunities for folks to explore how we might be able to build a climate-ready workforce. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I want to open up another question for folks, and I'd love to hear from everybody or anyone who wants to chime in. In this moment, if we are to take one step today given the overwhelm that it sounds like all of us are facing, what is that one thing that we should be doing to help push the needle on energy democracy? Ruth.
I think we need more community organizing, grassroots involvement, broaden the base of the work, and illustrate the multiple, benefits of the transformation of our electric systems that are not only addressing the climate crisis, but also empowering ways that can empower communities and help in this process of energy literacy, which is so important nowadays.
And I think I have it on the slides, Selena, what I was saying are like the most important things. But if it was one, I would say, tell your story, tell the power of energy democracy and reducing those energy costs, tell the story around how you're paying for it with these federal dollars that have been approved by Congress. Connect those dots, because you understand the value of energy democracy and how it can reduce costs and how it can reduce burdens and how it can really increase livelihoods for all Americans, really, and internationally. But tell that story, because I do think that we, as say Democrats generally, kind of failed to tell the story well, have failed to tell the story well in the past, even though we all get it. And so I think connecting those dots for everyone is really, really important right now. They need to understand kind of what's at stake. So thank you.
I can jump in and just say, I think a thing I'm thinking a lot about is how we connect with people and figure out what is the thing that activates them. Like, what is it? Is it their electricity bill being too high, the fact that they can't pay their rent, like figuring that out, because I think that's that's the cornerstone of all good organizing, is figuring out how to bring them into this new moment and the momentum, because I think that people are feeling really isolated in this moment. They are feeling really overwhelmed by both like the fact that eggs are $8 and also just like watching the train wreck happen right now. And so I think it is this opportunity for us to say, okay, I hear you, I see you, and like, don't I have an incredible organizing opportunity, and being able to build organizing off of that.
And I'm a recovering former politician, so you can't hold me down to one, Selena. But I think that to reiterate, I think regardless of the work we do, it's be in community, right? It is to truly connect with the people. This was some of our COVID lesson as well, was as our worlds got smaller, like, do you know the name of your mail carrier? Do you know the person, I've identified that Armando, who cleans our office at our law firm, used to be the cleaner at our synagogue. Like, totally bizarre connection, miles away, different worlds, and just like, chatting with folks about their lives and really knowing each other is uplifting and phenomenal and heartwarming. And then we get a chance to connect about, I come from the Paul Wellstone world of organizing and electoral politics, which is speak to people's self-interest, but our higher self-interest, right? So what kills me, sorry, I hate when people do what I just did, which was, right, like begging you to agree with me. But it's not the base self-interest of I need more money, or I need more of this, or I need more of that, or I need more fame. It's I am just livid about the fact that the country that your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents built to be better and better and better is being sold and stripped for parts and vacated. So what's our higher self-interest? It's to preserve what our ancestors and the people that we know directly have built and made possible for us, and to lifting up the opportunity that we have for each other. So talking about that self-interest together. And then the third thing is to include in your community the elected officials that are the most engaged and friendly at the biggest scale. So if you have a friendly state legislature or friendly state legislator, reach out to them. Why? Many of them are also trying to find ways to be of use. Many of them are also like flummoxed about how can I find my own positive sense of progress in light of everything that's being asked of me. And so asking them to do things like pre-weatherization funding, phenomenal, right? Or Jillian and I have been able to partner in Washington State to provide publicly funded legal services and tax filing services to direct pay recipients. That is easily replicable. $100,000 in a small city could be a massive, could mean 10 or 20 projects. $1 million allocation could mean 100 to 300 projects. And solving the problems we're talking about. If you don't have a great legislature, be like the mayor of Birmingham, Alabama, that I got to hang with the week after election, who was like, look, I got a hostile federal government that's literally going after me. I got a hostile state government that's literally going after my city. Is it going to stop me? Hell no. Right? Are we going to make this the most climate resilient and communitarian community? Lift up those people that are on our side, that are in elected office, that want to stay in elected office, not to keep the certificate, but to do good stuff. And it may just mean have a cup of coffee or a beer if you're so inclined, or a glass of wine, but get to know them. It's basic organizing. Don't come in with a demand right away. Come in with, I want to know you. I want you to see me as a resource. Let's see what we can partner together. So it's the same organizing. I didn't do a great job as a legislator of organizing with my fellow legislators. And that's the one thing that would bring me back to public service, and be like, hey, could I do that better? But that's what we do well. And I'm inspired by particularly Ruth and Johanna's on the ground incredible work, and Selena, what you show me every time that I hang out with y'all. That we all know how to do this. We just need to keep rocking and rolling, and it makes us feel better to do it again.
Thanks, Jeremy.
And imagine I was a member of the House, so not a state senator. Like a state senator would have gone on for 20 more minutes. So, that was brief for a politician.
Yeah, you did great. You did great. I think to your point, it's a muscle, and community building is a muscle, and we have to make sure that we're still in practice of using that muscle. And luckily, we are surrounded by such an amazing network of organizers, of policy experts, of attorneys, of community members who are thinking about these things and thinking about them in so many different angles, whether it is from the hyper-specific technical knowledge angle or the lived reality angle of dealing with blackouts, of higher bills, of the high egg prices, all of these things. And that makes all of us experts in our own rights. And hopefully that instills that continued hope in us that we do play a role in these shifts that are required, not just of our energy system, but of our economy, of our government, and good governance, and of the future that we want to see for everybody. Thank you all for sharing your wisdom, your expertise, your insight today. Thanks for folks who joined as audience members. I also want to uplift one piece of wisdom that Gregory King, a panelist from a webinar that we hosted last year, and one of the leaders from Boston Community Solar Cooperative, said that we need to launch campaigns to combat misinformation that's a foundation of the attacks on DEI, science, climate, etc. And yeah, I think that's so part of the storytelling that we all have a responsibility to do. Before we go, I want to make sure that you all know that we are going to be sharing the recording out, the links to everything that was shared in the chat today, any resources that came from our conversation, as well as the bios for the speakers, so that you can go ahead and take your time as you wish to read this, to read through the materials, and to also share it with your networks. I'm going to read through some last calls to action, sort of synthesizers for today's conversation. I'm going to ask Noura to share one last slide from my slide deck to close us off. For those of you who attended the first part of the What Now webinar series, hopefully this looks familiar to you. It should be popping up soon. But the first one, as it pops up, is that We have a call to action to organize. You heard it here today, folks. Whether it is meeting your neighbors, speaking with your neighbors, yeah, one back, speaking with your neighbors, or diving headfirst into the cause that is making you feel passionate, making you feel angry, making you feel emotion. This is a time. If you're interested in tapping into some energy democracy organizing, you can go on over to the Energy Democracy Project website, which I will drop in the chat right now, and you can learn more about us, about our network, and find a collaborator near you. The second is to resource our communities. So much of our conversation today was talking about the lack of funding, the cutting of funding, the illegal slashing of programs, the potential cutting of FEMA and of the billions of dollars that are committed there. And the reality is that we have a huge gap in funding right now to have these projects come to fruition. So any philanthropists and funders who are here on the call, we're calling on you to provide capital resources upfront to help fill these gaps as the federal government continues the strike on IRA funds and threatens our ongoing funding as we remain steadfast. And then the last one is to stand in solidarity. Broader standing in solidarity and sharing our stories with one another, understanding that there are mirrors in our struggles and in our opportunities for liberation, and also a much more specific way to stand in solidarity with some of the organizing that's happening in Puerto Rico. You heard a little bit about it here today, but I'm going to drop the link in the chat to sign up in solidarity if you haven't already, so that you can showcase that from the South to the seaside communities of the West, and from Alaska to Puerto Rico, we're all calling on shifts of our energy system because it's all linked all across the country and around the world. So dropping that in the chat right now so you can follow that. And till next time, everybody, keep on with your hard work, continue your impassioned organizing, and thank you so much for your ongoing dedication and commitment to justice. See you all soon.
Thank you.